it's good for you to make a little intro to yourself before we get going into it. Andreas from the US, Robin from the UK, both of you bouncing around the world. Super cool guys, by the way, both of you. So I think you should get to know each other in the future as well.
Andreas, maybe if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure. I'll go first. Yeah. So just a little on me. Been in venture capital since my second year of university. Was lucky enough to be recruited into a firm that I ended up actually being one of the investors in one of Eric's former companies. And then by way of working with one of our portfolio companies, TBM, I kind of discovered Tampa Bay as an area that wasn't really explored for capital, but we had some very large assets in the cybersecurity space. So in 2018, I decided to really self all in my capital allocator here. Fast forward to today, we raised a $27 million fund one, have 14 companies in portfolio, just continuing to ride the wave of progress from Florida and Tampa.
Nice. Well, I think my story is a little bit different. I kind of ended up in this industry sort of by accident, by living in Iran for a year, learning Farsi. It's a long story that I won't go into too much now, but I've been at Sturgeon for 6 years as we kind of launched our first fund back in 2020. It was a $25 million fund, and our focus is exclusively on emerging markets and focus really on Central Asia, the Caucasus, and South Asia, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Kind of high-level thesis being you have a small number of markets still at the early stage of their digitalization, kind of following in that playbook we've seen in India, Indonesia, Brazil, and elsewhere. So it's a first fund in 2020, a $25 million fund, made 18 investments across 8 countries. Currently closing in the first close of our second fund, which is the target 50 million.
Not too bad. Not too bad. And now you're bouncing around the world, right, Robin? Where are you sitting right now? You got back to London for a couple of days, or?
Yeah, I landed back in London 3 hours ago from Uzbekistan. I've been out of the UK for about a month, and I will be leaving again on Sunday to go to Singapore, Australia, and Bangladesh and Azerbaijan in November.
Look at that, bouncing around. And Andreas, you're in Tampa, right?
I'm in Tampa. The extent of our bouncing around in Tampa is if we go on one side of the bay or the other to St. Pete or not. But yeah, no,
But it's a beautiful, beautiful area, though. Beautiful area. Hey, good. I'm gonna do like a little formal intro outside of you guys being, gone, and we get that started. But the whole idea for today is that we're gonna go through 3 different decks. We're not gonna really dive deeper into what do you think about the business by itself. Let's say a little bit out of that. Okay, we're gonna just go through those 3 decks. I'm gonna ask some questions. The purpose of this is to be able to present the thoughts that the venture capitalists are going through in your minds when you are scrolling through decks. The attention span can be very, very short. And a lot of the times there's a lot of different things in decks that people just don't realize that what should be included, what should not be included, even though there's widely available information out there in the world. And a lot of the time when we talk to founders, they have simply no idea what the other side of the table thinks. So maybe we're able to get a little glimpse into the beautiful brains of yours and see the thought process in a way. Sounds good?
Sounds good.
Any questions? Anything you want to get ready? Get your mindset, ready? No?
And just
this is what we do all day long. So I think we're uniquely qualified to review decks.
Sounds good. And just before we even open up the decks, Andreas, couple liners, and then Robin, couple liners. What makes you bored in a deck that you don't even scroll through to the end, and what makes you just excited that and how quickly you typically decide that are you gonna even take a serious look, because you're just scrolling through so much stuff throughout the day. WhatsApp, email, decks, everybody wants a piece of your attention. You become like gods of the game when everybody's craving a little bit of that attention of yours. So that can be very tempting to become this overlord of things in a way. And so give a couple liners on what are you looking in a deck.
Robin, would you like to speak first to your stature as a god and overlord?
I hope the laugh doesn't reinforce the misperception. Um, I mean, I guess some of the things that I don't know, it's not so much specifically debt related, but how often we get sent things that are completely irrelevant for what we invest in. Like how often founders haven't actually done just a little bit of research beforehand to see is like, oh, where does this firm actually invest? Like, what stage do they invest in? What kind of verticals do they invest in? Like, you can save yourself a lot of hassle, irrespective of how good or bad your debt is, just by doing that little bit of research. So kind of taking a step back before you even send the deck across. Things that I like are generally simpler decks. So I'm not expecting to come out of it with an exact picture of every aspect of your business, but really to have in as few words as possible. I studied history where it was always that the point was you had to try and sign of intelligence was to say more with less. And I think if you can do that with a deck, then that generally creates a positive.
Makes sense. Andreas?
Yeah, I would say for me, very similar. The point that I really pick up on in particular is when there's a lack of any quantitative figuring or data. That generally is the work side of a deck. Telling your story is usually very organic and very easy to do. Kind of measuring the story so far, or measuring the outcome that you would like, or applying any sort of measurement to your business. When you see decks that completely shy away from any sort of quantitative figure, whether it be their market size or their current traction, that to me isn't really that engaging, because you see so many decks, right? The figures between them are the objective facts. Everything else is narrative. So for me, that plays a big role in how those figures are presented, how simply they're conveyed, and yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest thing.
When someone puts something like a huge addressable market, and you think, well,
Right.
Well, let's put a number on that and see what you actually mean. One thing is when people bury the team slide, like right at the end of it. It's like we're investing between kind of seed and Series A. A lot of it's going to come down to what is it about you as kind of the founders and founding team that make you the right people for this. If it's right at the end, I might never make it there. I mean, something else might come up, an email comes in, I get a call, but I think it should be really up there, second or third page within a presentation you're sending to investors.
Absolutely. One more last question before we scroll through the decks. We could even have a different session, just stay on this topic by itself. I think it's super fascinating. How many decks out of 10 do you actually finish? A ballpark estimate. Do you read through all of them? That's just the main question.
For me, I read through all of them. The speed at which I read through all of them would change, but at least get to the end to see everything. The difference would be in not opening a deck. If the way, like even the way you're presented the company is in very poor fashion, I think that's probably more the question. Is either getting me to spend more time on very particular slides, or if you send an email saying, "Hey, we deserve to be funded," guys are crazy if you don't fund us. Like, those are the kind of things that are not really compelling.
Yeah, I agree. Once it's been opened, then we'll usually get to it. But it, as you said, is like it's irrelevant or just sort of sent with no context or anything. Quite ends up in spam when you send it like that anyway. But if there's no context, no kind of like cover notes, or it's just relevant, then it's getting open.
Cool. Well, let's now get into the main theme of the day. We're going to scroll 3 decks, as I mentioned. They're a little bit more extensive, and so we're going to skip some of them and just go through the theme. Share your thoughts. What do you see? So, first company is going to come from Mexico. Kigui is operating on a world against food waste. They are claiming that a lot of food is getting wasted all around the world, and they want to play on that game and try to help a little bit. So they're trying to position themselves in supermarket shelves and do something. Basically, are you able to understand now from the first two slides what are they trying to do? Any thoughts on the first two slides?
Yeah, I mean, they clearly are presenting the problem first. So I've seen a few different versions of how these decks can start. So if you go back one slide,
Yeah.
the decks can. I've seen a lot of kind of the most successful decks start, or the ones that convey the message the best, start in one of three ways. Usually either, and you see this, which is very common with founders who've gone through the YC program, is they'll usually throw out a few KPIs on the first slide. To kind of capture, and that's an intention where you're seeing a lot of very similar formatted decks to kind of capture the attention of some KPIs, like, hey, this is something that's really interesting, right? I have a preference for the introducing the problem first, like they do, because it kind of frames the rest of the deck as to what you're actually going to be looking at. But the easiest ways I've seen to start it would be problem. Sometimes the team slide will come first, but I'm not as big of a fan of that because I'd like to dive into the problem first before I figure out the who behind the why.
Yeah.
But in this case, I would have said that a way to improve this is, so you have the like $10,000 sticker there. In my head, I may be thinking that the average problem might be a $10,000 problem for a supermarket, but I wouldn't actually know. So in this case, a real example or kind of a more drilled down example might make it more tangible for me.
Robin, any thoughts on the first two slides?
If anything, I don't know. I probably like the second one more, and it taps into what Andreas was saying earlier about putting the numbers on it. Here, that's making it very clear for me, which now is, I guess, probably something that you're aware of anyway. But here are some very clear numbers. The only thing is sometimes, and I know you mentioned these guys are in Mexico. Sometimes when people give the kind of global picture, when I know it's a sort of Mexican startup, is a little bit like is it true that this is exactly what it's like in Mexico as well? Like, you're kind of showing that a global addressable market for something that will probably be a national company, which I don't know how the rest of it's going to go. This kind of annoys me sometimes, and I don't know if we'd have the context on the rest of the deck. But when people give a kind of global TAM when actually they're operating in a particular market or region, and therefore is not necessarily relevant to what they're building.
I think that's a valuable point. And so you would expect that they would narrow down earlier into their target market and what is the size of the problem there.
Well, I don't know. They may be about to do it in the next slide, and
yeah, but okay, that's a good point.
I'm not going to be so bothered by it, but well, it's clearly a big problem, but it's I imagine quite a local solution rather than an.
Cool. Here, if we go now into a little further on, this is their how. Are you getting a sense of the how?
For me, no. Personally, no. I would say that, like, I understand very quickly, like, okay, we're going to connect consumers to producers to reduce the food waste, but yeah, that's just a relationship, right? We're going to facilitate a relationship. That's every technology product with two users on either end in the world. In this case, I think it probably would have made a little bit more sense to diagram that, like, even in a visual perspective, if you diagrammed where the consumer sits and where the grocery store sits, that's a lot easier to catch. I'm sure they did that. Like, I understand the counter against store promotion, but me as a generalist, I'm not going to understand how ineffective in-store promotion is beyond kind of the average person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it would have been interesting to see kind of almost more of a diagram of where each person sits in the party. And that can be something really simple with like 3 bubbles, the consumer, the person at the end. But just that the screenshots here, I think, is still kind of leaning on the problem slide more than moving forward into the solution.
Yes.
Yes.
And I find it,
yeah.
Robin.
For me, no real idea what they're going to do from that slide. Like it's a little bit kind of dead weight, and it looks like the next slide is going to go on and actually give
A little bit more
some more
context.
meaningful context and information about it. Like as you said, that store promotion thing that could have gone in the problem. Like, are we still in? Are we in problem? Are we in solution now? I'm not sure.
Okay. From there, if we go a little down, I think that now they're getting a little bit more concrete. Buy anywhere and get rewarded. We hack the system without integration, without hardware. Find and buy, scan receipt and product. Number 3, reward.
Yeah, so I guess this is where that diagram would have been effective because the direction has changed, right? So initially I thought that they were just facilitating a direct connection between a producer and an end consumer. The solution is realistically a rewarding app that comes on the back end of a purchase that's done inside of a retail environment, right? So that's where I think like now I'm starting to piece together what the solution is, but I'm guessing I'm getting towards the end of the slide deck, right? And I still don't really fully understand, like I kind of understand the business model just because I've seen a lot of companies like this, but if I hadn't sitting in more generalist seat, I think those two are it's very different messaging of that you're going to connect an end supplier and a user. And then also, hey, but we're only going to do that by rewarding you. And you're not going to actually have any interface with the producers of the food. And you're just going to buy everything with the same behavior that you do today. You're just going to happen to get rewarded first up. That's probably, I would guess, probably closer to the expiration date, right? So you see, there's a whole lot of details there that I had to guess to understand this compared to the actual display of it being very clear. And the only thing I'm guessing on is, are they going to get product fit or not? Is this the right team or not? That's the real questions you want to have in a deck, not how does this work and what is it? As much as possible, obviously.
Yeah, I would agree as well. You can sort of fill in the gaps from intuition, and maybe you've seen it before. I haven't seen a deck or a solution like this before in our markets. You can kind of fill in the gaps, and you say, assume you get more if it's closer to expiration date, but that may not be correct. This one could have come earlier. In the previous slide, you could have almost done away with completely. And if you were then going to go into more detail, that's assuming you have a limited number of slides. Previous one could have been gone. And I think even the early 2 ones on the problem could have maybe been combined into one. And you could have just been clearer and got to this point quicker. Because now I'm kind of interested in it, or even though it's imperfect, now it's becoming more interesting. Before it was a little bit vague.
Yeah. So then basically what would have been better for you to be able to grasp your attention or in the higher level of interest earlier? This is like everything like here, just put earlier on top.
Yeah, I mean, the previous solution slide was a bit of a
Yeah.
waste of time and space. This is giving more. Now you balance between putting more information there around how the solution works. I mean, all that previous one is a simple sort of basically get paid for buying products closer to expiration, like that.
Yeah.
Does that mean what the like fundamental model is? And then this one is, okay, how does that actually work? That might have been a way to do it. And having just a simple slide with a few lines, maybe a picture or a diagram on would have made it very clear how they were actually solving the problem, or the sort of the high level approach. And then this being the kind of actual how you do it in the sort of day-to-day use.
Yeah. Absolutely. And if we here now just focus on a couple more slides on their business model, and then before we jump on to the next, so we're not going to go through all of the slides of the deck, but the whole point is that do you get a grasp of an understanding, a good grasp on what these are doing? So over here, the last couple slides, to fight food waste, we are building the go-to platform for mass consumption data and product expiry date. What are your thoughts on this?
What I don't know. If anything, a little bit confused. Maybe it's come off a flight overnight, but go-to platform for mass consumption data and product expiry date. I don't quite understand what that is, and maybe I'm missing something here, but it's become less clear than it was after the previous slide.
Okay. And Andreas, is it more clear or more obvious to you now or what it was before?
Unfortunately, well, I mean, it's becoming more clear because you're having more of the data, but I actually kind of disagree with now more with one of the original statements earlier in the deck. So earlier in the deck, the claim was that producers and the end consumer are the ones who are being closer connected to decrease food waste, right? That's not really accurate here. So the the producer, to them, it doesn't really matter because where the shrinkage would happen would be on the shelves of the stores, right? So for the most part, they've already sold these goods to the stores. I would assume most brands in the world don't have, maybe some do have agreements with like fresh food producers where they'll kind of not pay for or take back things that expire on their shelves. But generally a supermarket is just an exercise of trying to find perfect supply and demand for a ton of different products really, really quick, right? So who is the real person here who has the shrinkage problem in food? That's likely the grocery store. So that's where the idea of me being closer, having a closer relationship to the supplier, I don't necessarily rings true through now that I've gone through the problems, gone through kind of the solutions here, right? It sounds like what it really is it's nudging the consumer to products that are just as good in a retail environment, but that might be close to expiry. So in here, while this flywheel is interesting, more so the value of what I would say is that, okay, I would really be focusing on the case of the supermarket, right? Because the supermarket here is they're the ones with the shrinkage problem. They're the ones who are the distributors of all this food. And the supply, especially of fresh goods, the stuff that's going bad very quickly, that's not really branded, right? That's usually a commodity for us when we're in the supermarket anyway.
Yeah.
It's not that we know a specific brand of apples. So that's where I think they missed an opportunity. I understand why they want to create the flywheel, because after Amazon, everybody wants to show that the customers that they get are kind of self-reinforcing to other business models. But in my mind, it's not that the flywheel here doesn't make as much sense as it would to dive more into the case of what the savings on the supermarket is.
Yeah.
Right. Like at scale, how many tons of food wastage just in Mexico would Kigui be able to prevent? I think that's a more compelling story to tell.
Mm-hmm. And here, just one last slide that we are basically taking a look at is about their business model. Win-win business model, take rate on generated sales.
Yeah, and this one actually, I think this one's actually really clear. I think this is one of the better slides in the deck so far. This makes a lot of sense to me, and it seems like they've dove into the unit economics pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the only thing which does confuse me, because you were saying they're referring again to the producer, but is this the supermarket? Is it the retailer? Because I'm assuming at this point the retailer has bought the inventory sitting on their shelves, and they're wanting to sell it now. Them taking some kind of hit on the by providing the cash back versus that being wastage, that makes sense. I don't quite see how this is flying the step back in the value chain to the producer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Super good. On this, we're gonna end it for Kigui right now. We're gonna stop for Kigui. We're gonna go into the next company. Overall thoughts. One question about Kigui. Do you understand what they're doing? Or no?
I understand the problem they're trying to address. I definitely want to speak to them to understand, even it sounds mundane, but like the terminology of who they're actually talking about when they're talking about producer. Is it the retailer, the producer? Who do they have the relationship with on their side? Is that kind of cashback type thing suggests that there is some, they have to have some sort of B2B engagement as well as the B2C engagement.
Yeah, overall, I like the deck and basically agree with everything Robin said throughout. I think the story's different. They're trying to sell the story of that you're more connected to the producer. I think the real story is that they're using consumers to basically prevent shrinkage within retail facilities. And I think that's the real story. And how much money the average family in Mexico were to save if they were to use Kigui. how many tons of food you could prevent wasting at a single, large supermarket location in Monterrey, for example. Like those added pieces of tangibility, I think would make sense. But I just don't think they're telling the story as correctly as they maybe could be.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, now we're gonna go into a company from Colombia. The company is called Lizit, that enables a growing equipment renting ecosystem from Bogota. Um, so they started with the problem right away. The equipment rental industry has been forgotten by tech. Current solutions are slow, expensive, and have a very poor customer experience. First slide. Thoughts, feelings.
I kind of like it. And it's fairly simple and to the point. I'm not entirely sure what they mean by software factories, but maybe that's just ignorance on my part. So yeah, I have a pretty good idea of what they're going after. I like B2B software, so I'm already interested, but that's a personal point.
Mm-hmm. Andreas?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's an okay problem slide. I'd say I'd maybe give it kind of like a B. I'd kind of slim down the scope of the problem that you're initially focusing on and presenting here, because they're presenting 3 problems with 2 sub-problems each. But overall, luckily we have a little more experience in this space. So, yeah, I think I understand the problem, but I'm not sure if I didn't have as much insight into the problem already, it will come across.
Mm-hmm. From there, we go further on. A single rental process can take more than 45 minutes, and clients and suppliers feel the pain. Here's an example from tool rental in one of Latam's biggest home improvement retailers. The rental flow and the return flow.
It's giving me the impression, we have actual numbers in there, giving me the impression these guys have done their on the ground research of how things function.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like this slide because they're putting a tangible scope to the size of the problem, right? In a time cost. And then the individual stages really help me understand like what's the buyer journey or what's the renter journey in this before we even jump into what their solution is. Helping me kind of get into the profile of a person who go and rent. I really like the slide. I think this is well done.
I guess the only way you could quantify the dollar impact of that 45 minute taking so long would be interesting, but I don't know if that may come up later. But
Robin, can you say that again? I think there was a little echo that happened.
I said the only thing that would be interesting if you could kind of quantify what that impact of it taking 45 minutes was on the clients and suppliers. Like suppliers, you assume that's meaning missed business. Is it that they're operating at X% capacity, or they're missing a certain number of customers a day because it's taking so long to rent each piece of equipment? It would be the only thing if there was a number you could put on that, then you're sort of just adding more tangible data to what the product is, to what the problem is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I think just this order process is what, a little bit more than like 12-ish, 13% of the total time you're spending on a job if you're a 6-hour job. So, like that kind of stuff, exactly like what Robin points out, it just helps scope the impact of the problem.
Yes. And from there, we go to the market slide. Even with systematic inefficiencies, the industry is massive, and there's a great opportunity of unlocking growth through technology.
Yeah. So they've done something that Robin actually mentioned when we first started, which is they've incorporated market sizes that, if you don't know, look very large, but if you think about them a little bit deeper, might not necessarily be accurate. So you see here that they have the entire construction and industrial equipment renting market. That might account for a lot of that might account for very long-term leases of very large pieces of equipment that are realistic. Like, does United Airlines rent its plane? No. That's a very type of lease. That's a different type of lease agreement than your typical equipment rental person. And then on top of that, you would assume that in the construction equipment, the largest of machinery on long-term rentals would probably take a large chunk of that as well. So for these guys, I think the market size might be a bit overstated, but generally the impact usually comes across of that heavy equipment, transportation of equipment, construction equipment markets in general typically are very, very, very large. But
Mhm.
I would, if I were to see this deck in my office, the first things I would start to question would be how much of that construction equipment rental is actually long-term leases of very big machines. And then in the industrial equipment, same kind of thing. How much of that is machinery that's rented to a factory over a 10-year period or something like that, right? That's not really the customer that this is actually addressing.
And is this also, I mean, they have this market. Is this the global market? Is this their local market? Is it their regional markets? I don't know. I'm missing any, maybe it's in the footnotes and I can't read it, but that would be a question for me as well. Is I agree with Andreas said, like chances are half of this, if not more, is something that is not relevant for the kind of product they're offering. And is this even their market, or is it something that is well beyond what they could address?
Mhm. And are you seeing a lot of these similar type of challenges that you're just describing in other decks that you're going through, and then you're gonna get out of with more questions and more confusion, perhaps about their exact market when they're trying to present these type of things? Or how do you normally see these?
It slightly depends how well we know the kind of the business model and the market they're operating in. I mean, sometimes we've had like a consumer market size in a country we know well, and they put up a figure on number of consumers or the value of kind of that particular market. And if we know that's not even close to what is true, then it can be a way of putting us off. But then I also understand you're speaking to an investor who doesn't know the space so well, and actually you can get away with putting a big number and getting them interested. And if it gets you onto a call because they thought the market was so big, and actually, okay, maybe it's not as big, but it got someone interested in the first place, then maybe it's a risk worth taking.
Mhm. Andreas, any thoughts?
No, nothing further.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, then to the solution. Lizit builds SaaS to be the tech enabler and growth catalyst for equipment rental companies, from back office and dashboards to client-facing UX and UI.
Okay. I'll share one of my pet peeves on this is when you just share screenshots. So we don't know what functionality in the SaaS platform is actually solving the problem of that time horizon, right? Like I understand that you've probably productized some of the steps that you put into slide one, but for me, this can be a case of have some founder tunnel vision when they create their deck, right? You have to remember we don't know anything about how your SaaS platform is solving this. Maybe that's going to come down into the individual steps below. But generally, I think just the existence of a SaaS platform, the existence of a booking interface, I'd like to dive into a little bit more of like, what is the actual customer flow through your SaaS platform that cuts out all that time that you talked about. Maybe they'll get into that later down, but these slides to me are so general that they don't necessarily have the impact that you have. And then additionally, a piece of feedback on this would be, it's great that they want to show 3 different sizes of the interface and show that it's on mobile. I would actually tend towards saying, hey, make the screenshot image that you're grabbing actually much larger so that you can see it. Because in some cases, right, you're looking at this through a preview window in your email, not in full screen.
Yeah.
So then if it's not in full screen, the actual size of that interface is small enough to where I would barely be able to see anything on it anyway. So making that interface larger might help answer that question as to, okay, what are the exact steps that I'm taking to mitigate against that time suck that you said was there?
I think what could have been a neat way to do it is actually taking that kind of user journey that they had before and just showing the bits you cut out. Like what have you cut out? What gets cut out through the software, or
Yeah.
what is reduced in time because you've automated that. Like, that would be probably the clearest way of, because I'm remembering that and I kind of like that. Now, if you're showing me very clearly that it's gone from 45 minutes to 5 minutes, and this is how, then that I think could be an effective way. It might be a bit too much information to try and get on one slide, and maybe they're going to do it later anyway. But I agree. There's screenshots. I mean, I can't see anything on them. They don't tell me really. They just kind of look nice, which, okay, you obviously want the things to look nice, but I care more about what it actually does and the value it adds rather than whether it looks nice for the user.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And here we're going to just go through a couple last slides on Lizit before we go to the final one. Here, our end-to-end platform supposed to business operations. There's more screenshots. Is this helping you or making you more confused compared to the last one? And then also here, one more provides visibility and statistics. BI dashboards for data visualization and management, inventory performance and profitability tracking, client profile, and client-based statistics. So these slides, did they help to answer the questions that you had here? Or no?
Not really.
Yeah, I mean, a tiny bit, but like a good exercise you could go through is if you were to rewind and say, okay, what SaaS platform is not attempting to be an end-to-end business operation platform? What SaaS platform doesn't provide you visibility into and additional data and statistics? Right? Like, it's same thing again here with smaller screenshots, very general claims about the software. Like, talk about specific product features, like Robin said, that go back to carving out individual steps in that time chain that they identified as the problem, right? They already have the really good framing of how the problem, of what the problem looks like. You could literally say, like, this feature covers this part, this feature covers this part, this feature covers this part. Maybe for an operator of a equipment rental business, some of the things in here might jump out at you more, but as a venture capitalist, I would say it's a little bit too general at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And out of there and out of these, what you just saw and read, Lizit, do you understand what they're doing?
I understand the problem they're trying to solve. As Andreas said, they've given generic how software could solve that problem. It's like, yes, this problem could be solved by software. But I haven't really got a sense of exactly how and why they're doing it.
Yeah. Andreas?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think they were relying a lot on their on the product screenshots to kind of maybe share that story. So maybe larger and singular focus product screenshots and more of a singular focus on individual features that solve some of the problem they had identified. I think that would be better. But I mean, I think I kind of understand it. And candidly, we have a little bit of a background in the space. But outside of that, if I didn't, I'm not 100% sure that I would understand the massive, what's the order of magnitude increase in efficiency or cost feature that they have, right?
Yeah.
That question, I don't think I can answer today.
Cool. And here we go to the last deck, all the way from Argentina. The company is called GetGloby from Buenos Aires. Is connecting businesses with a global audience. It seems to be on ads and artificial intelligence. They start with the problem. Global advertising is a nightmare. Cultural editation, industry specific, manual translations, and overwhelming costs. APAC unreachable, multi-platform challenge.
There's a lot going on here.
A lot going on. But is it good? A lot going
But
on. Or is it making you confused?
Well, it's making me feel like it's a bit of a nightmare. Although I'm not sure whether creating a slide that has a lot going on to emphasize that. No, look, all of these points seem relevant. Maybe a little bit crowded for me, but that's more of a personal preference thing.
Yeah. Andreas?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's okay. Kind of going back to what I said originally. I think the only thing that quantitatively scopes the size of this problem is the figure that campaign experts are working with more than 15 platforms each. Otherwise, like, great, these are problems. Everybody has a lot of problems in their day-to-day work life. Like, what's the scope and size of this problem? I think that would add some strength to this, but I think they're on a good start. The identification of the problems, the actual language they're using in the problem, I think they explain it decently well. But I think they could probably just drill down on the scope and, give me like global advertising is a nightmare. What's one real figure and one real process that explains that well?
Yeah. Here we go. Now to the next one, what they're trying to depict here: 30 days translation agencies versus GetGloby. It's 30 seconds.
Good. Like clear impact and clear benefit of what they're doing. Saving time, saving money. Yeah, I think it's a good one. I like that it's one slide for problem, one slide immediately then for solution, rather than kind of maybe dragging it out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'll jump on something that's like maybe a little VC training. So you see how they didn't tell me what their pricing is? They just want to advocate that it's up to 90% off. That's like, if I were to review this deck, first note would be like, okay, get a clear picture on pricing. Yeah. But otherwise, I think it's really good. But that little thing to me set off an alarm bell immediately. Like, okay, why don't they just tell me what the pricing is? Why do they have to advocate to me like I'm a consumer that it's 90% off instead of just tell me what the pricing is? We're on the same team if we do invest in the company, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that means that the pricing model is kind of dynamic. Maybe I think there might be an easier way to display that, like average fee per user or something. That figure is going to be impactful enough. So.
Yes. But then here again, we go, they're trying to clarify their solution even more. They're referencing back into the first slide. Global advertising was a nightmare. Addressing all industry challenges in 3 simple steps: connect, create, public. And then from here, again, with the solution that GetGloby translates ads and marketing assets into 100+ languages. These 2 slides about their solution.
I'm a fan of the first one. I think that kind of referencing back to the first slide of how they is a nightmare, was a nightmare, has a nice ring to it.
Mm-hmm. And how about the second one over here?
Yeah, I think this is like the first time I'm really like understanding, okay, this is the actual feature that's a big driver of the value, right? Is automatic translation and kind of assurance that those translations make cultural and are relevant in their native languages, right? Like, cool. That's the initial product that I understand here.
Yeah.
I'd say good overall. I think both the slides are good. The order's interesting, like going to the pricing and then coming back to problem again. But yeah, I think that's fine. It's different.
But overall, in these first, not 1, 2, 3, 4 slides, you get a good glimpse, a good understanding what they're doing, the scope of their work, what they're trying to do, etc.
Yeah, of course. I think there's always refinement. But so far they seem to be on a decent track of getting both Robin and I to follow along.
Yeah.
Very good. And then I would say that how we do it, it will be the last slide. Leveraging the power of JAGA. JAGA is the first translation engine optimized for advertising.
Yeah, they named their feature. Nice nice narrative point. Makes it seem bigger and more real. So, fan of that.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I think so far for me it makes sense.
Makes sense. I've got a lot of questions on how it does it. Like, but that's more for a cool. Like, it's clearly, if it is something they can get right, particularly that as they say, the nuances of every market, then it has a lot of potential. So it's definitely got me interested, and is sparking questions, but are kind of a positive questions rather than, hang on, this doesn't make sense. It's more like, okay, well, how do you do it in a way in something that really works, as you say, across 100 different markets?
Yeah, absolutely. So GetGloby presented themselves in a clear manner. Of course, like what you mentioned at the beginning is if you're investing, both of you, in early stage companies, you need to understand the teams, the dynamics of those people behind building these products. We're not going to dive deep into that right now or at all, and we're not going to look into what do you think about the business. But from GetGloby, based on these first 5 slides, you were okay. You want to know more.
Yeah.
Very good. That was the 3 decks that we went through overall today, and I would just ask a couple more things over here before we get going into other things and other matters, is that what are your overall thoughts on these 3 different decks if we have to put them together compared to, let's say, Andreas, you're operating in the US market, and Rob, and you're especially in going towards other emerging markets, more towards the east side of the globe? How do you see? Are they similar? Are they design-wise, or are they there? Or any comparisons that you could make to the folks in Latin America?
Or judging quality of those against the sort of quality of slide decks that I normally see.
Yeah, in your markets, that is more towards the east side of the globe.
I think the couple of the first two, which had more local problems, fell into the trap that we talked about earlier of kind of talking about the kind of global market, global problem, and not enough about the sort of local one. Whereas I think the last deck for me was the best one, and it is truly addressing a global market, so it can speak in that context. I think it was the clearest about the kind of the problem it was addressing and the solution it was providing. And in terms of like relative to the sort of ones, I'd put that in the kind of the upper quartile of kind of presentations that I'd come across, and that would get me interested in having a follow-up call, even without much context or without it necessarily being a warm introduction.
Look at that. Andres?
Yeah. So, I mean, you and I have talked about this before. What I would say is I think what US founders in particular have a talent of doing is about selling the size and scope and magnitude and current timing need of their problem, right? I think that's what I really notice a big difference in from working in Sweden to now working here in the US, is that US founders are some of the best in the world at hitting some of those points, at really getting you to believe that the problem is large, and that they are the person to solve the problem, and that the problem needs to be solved now, and that it's almost like a once in a generation opportunity. But I would say overall, the quality of the decks and things I would say is in line with stuff we see here. That only difference is that once you maybe kind of progress past that initial phase of funding, we have so many resources here for pitch coaching and accelerators and incubators and things. So your narrative starts to get very, very tight in terms of, this is what the problem is. Here's how I've displayed the problem. Here's why the problem is ginormous. And here is why we are the team to solve that problem, right? Like, you leave basically every American pitch deck of a company that's kind of past the fundraising stage with very clear pictures on those things. And I think our experience at the last deck is exactly why, is because that's where Robin started to go into, I want to know how they can do this, right? That is a very different question. So you've already underwritten all of a sudden that, okay, the problem is important. The timing is important. How are they doing this? I want to investigate with the team to find out that how. That's the ultimate win, right? If we're battling on the scope and size and importance of the problem, we're not even on the ship of thinking that you need to solve this problem yet, let alone that you're solving it in the way that we feel is the right way and that we would like to invest in. So yeah, generally I think they look good, but that's the one thing I would really drill down on, is like, why now? And make it a very important functional, like, this is why now, this is the timing of the problem. This is a very simple explanation of the scope of the problem, right? Like, food waste is a $275 billion a year problem globally. The average family could be saving 40% of their of their grocery bill, right? Like it's like those really personified problem introductions are really helpful for us because look, as much as we want to be very professional, we like reading great stories and great narratives too. So that's generally what I think would be the big difference between a lot of US decks that I see in these three.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Robin and Andres, for taking a little of your time to go through these decks. I think it's going to be super helpful and valuable for the Latin American entrepreneurs to get a better understanding of what the other side of the table is thinking. Also, to everywhere in the world, I think the game is very opaque and there is a lot of confusion on both sides. The founders are getting extremely frustrated, and then the investors are getting extremely frustrated, and both are calling themselves idiots on occasions. And I think that we need more of these type of like dialogue and trying to understand these sides, especially from entrepreneurs, to understand what really goes on the minds of the investors. You're getting so much stuff in your emails, in your WhatsApps, and the founders don't need to they need to understand better is that how little time they have to in order to be able to spark your curiosity, so to speak. And it's most of the time it's never personal, that you're not responding to messages and looking into things, and you're just growing through so much stuff, and that's it, in very very simple terms. So thanks a lot, Robin and Andreas, for taking your time and having a little deep dive into, or a dive into, these three decks.
A pleasure. Thanks very much for having me on there. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me this morning.